Zanil sat on the small balcony of her sister's apartment in Cape Town, her phone balanced on her knee as she scrolled through job listings. The late afternoon sun was soft, and the hum of the city filled the background. She sighed, trying not to think about how long she had been there. What was supposed to be a few weeks had quietly turned into 2 months since she lost her job in Durban. Her phone buzzed suddenly, a group video call from her parents and her older sister, Nokuthula. She hesitated for a second before answering, fixing her hair quickly and forcing a smile. "Hi, everyone," she said, trying to sound cheerful. Her parents were laughing about something on the other end, and Nokuthula was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. They talked about family news, what to cook for dinner, and how cold the Cape Town evenings had become. Zanil even started to relax, happy to hear her parents' voices. Then, without warning, Nokuthula's tone changed. She turned to their mother and spoke sharply, forgetting to mute her mic. "Having her here is a nightmare, Mom. She eats, sleeps, and just stays here. I want her out." Zanil froze. The words cut through the laughter like glass shattering. Her smile vanished as her mother's face on the screen turned pale. Nokuthula didn't seem to realize what she'd done. Her mic was still on. Zanil's throat tightened. She wanted to speak but couldn't. The silence was heavy, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her mother stammer. "Nokuthula, your mic." It was too late. Zanil ended the call quietly, her hands trembling. The warmth of the afternoon suddenly felt cold. All she could hear were those words echoing in her head. A nightmare. For a few long seconds after Nokuthula's words slipped out, no one said anything. The air felt heavy. Even their mother, who was still on the video call, looked frozen with shock. Zanil's face burned. Her hands started shaking as she fumbled to end the call. When the screen went black, the silence around her felt louder than anything she'd ever heard. She sat there for a while, staring at her phone like it had betrayed her. The words replayed in her head again and again. Having her here is a nightmare. A nightmare. That was what her sister thought of her. The same sister who had hugged her when she first arrived and said, "Stay as long as you need, Zanil." She tried to convince herself it didn't matter, that maybe Nokuthula didn't mean it. But the tone of her voice, that cold edge, it had sounded so real. Zanil felt her stomach twist. She thought about all the small things she had done around the house. Cooking dinner, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, even ironing Nokuthula's work clothes. She had wanted to help, to show she wasn't a burden. But clearly none of it mattered. The sun went down, and the city lights began to flicker outside the window. Zanil didn't eat that night. She could hear Nokuthula moving around the apartment, laughing on the phone with someone, pretending like nothing had happened. Zanil stayed in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her half-packed suitcase. She'd started packing it days ago, thinking maybe she'd leave soon. Now she knew she had to. Tears welled up, but she wiped them away quickly. She didn't want to cry again. Crying wouldn't fix anything. She opened her laptop and started searching for cheap rooms to rent in Cape Town. Most of them were way too expensive. The few she could afford were small, shared spaces in noisy neighborhoods. Still, she saved the listing. She had maybe enough for 2 weeks of rent, if she stretched it. At midnight, she finally turned off her light, but she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made her tense. She could hear Nokuthula's footsteps in the hallway, the closing of her door, the faint buzz of her phone notifications. Everything about that apartment suddenly felt strange, like it didn't belong to her anymore. When morning came, Zanil got up before everyone else. She made a cup of tea, her hands still shaky. She looked around the kitchen one last time, at the dishes she'd washed, the fridge she'd filled with groceries she bought from her last savings. For the first time, it didn't feel like home. She sat down, opened her laptop again, and whispered to herself, "I have to leave." Then she started sending messages to the landlords she'd saved the night before. Even if she didn't know where she'd end up, she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't stay where she wasn't wanted. A few days passed after the call, and Nokuthula never mentioned what had happened. She carried on as if nothing had been said, as if those sharp, cruel words had just vanished into thin air. One morning, while Zanil was sitting on the couch with her laptop, still trying to find a job, Nokuthula walked in holding a white blouse. "Zanil, can you iron this for me?" she asked casually, like everything was normal. Zanil looked up slowly. For a second, she wanted to remind her sister of what she'd said, to ask if she really thought ironing her clothes was what a nightmare. But instead, she forced a small smile and nodded. "Sure." Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the blouse, the hiss of the iron filling the silence between them. On the surface, she looked calm. Inside, her chest felt like it was burning. Every time she looked at her sister, all she could hear were those words, "I want her out." By the weekend, their parents came over for lunch. Nokuthula suddenly became the perfect big sister. She was laughing, serving food, complimenting Zanil's cooking, even wrapping an arm around her shoulder in front of their parents. "Zanil makes the best pap," she said proudly, as if the week before hadn't happened. Their parents smiled, happy to see their daughters getting along. Zanil smiled too, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. She sat there, quiet, letting no Kuthla play her part. It was strange how easily some people could lie with a smile. After lunch, their mother asked Zanil to step outside with her. They sat on the small veranda, the afternoon breeze soft against their faces. Her mother gave her a gentle look and said, "Be patient, my child. Your sister means well. You know how stressful work can be." For a moment, Zanil just stared at her. She could feel the lump forming in her throat, the words she'd been holding back rising all at once. She let out a shaky breath and said quietly, "Does she, Mama?" "Because I heard everything." Her mother blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" Zanil looked down at her hands. She didn't mute her mic during the call. "I heard her say I was a nightmare, that she wanted me out." The silence that followed was heavy. Her mother's expression softened, full of guilt and confusion, but Zanil wasn't angry at her. She was just tired. Tired of pretending everything was fine. Tired of feeling unwanted in a place that was supposed to be home. When they went back inside, no Kuthla was laughing with their father as if nothing had happened. Zanil watched her for a long moment and realized something had changed. She wasn't angry anymore, just done. Something inside her had cracked, and once it broke, there was no going back. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Zanil sat on her bed with the light from her phone dimly glowing in the dark. Her mind was made up. She couldn't stay any longer, not after everything that had been said, and especially not after pretending everything was fine. The apartment didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a reminder that she didn't belong. She stood up and opened her small suitcase. It didn't take long to pack. She didn't have much. A few folded clothes, her CV, a pair of shoes, and the little money she had left. As she zipped the bag, a lump formed in her throat, but she swallowed it down. There was no point crying again. She had done enough of that. In the kitchen, she found a piece of paper and a pen. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote the note. "Thank you for helping me when I needed it. I'll manage from here." She read it twice before placing it neatly on the kitchen table. The quiet of the apartment wrapped around her like a blanket. She looked around one last time. The couch where she used to sit scrolling for jobs, the kettle they used every morning, the balcony where she had taken that call that changed everything. It all felt distant now, like someone else's life. Outside, the streets were cool and nearly empty. She dragged her suitcase down the road, the small wheels rattling against the pavement. When she reached the taxi rank, she climbed into a minibus heading to Mowbray. The driver glanced at her through the mirror, but didn't say anything. Zanil sat by the window, watching the city lights blur as they drove. Her chest felt tight, but there was also a strange calm beneath the sadness. For the first time in a long while, she was moving forward. It was late when she arrived in Mowbray. The area wasn't fancy, but it was alive. Street vendors were packing up, music played from a nearby shop, and a few people were still out chatting. She met the landlord, an older woman who showed her a small single room behind the main house. The walls were cracked, the bed squeaked, and there was just enough space for a chair and a suitcase. But when Zanil stepped inside, she smiled faintly. It was hers. She paid the rent for 2 weeks, almost all the money she had, and locked the door behind her. The silence felt different here. Not the heavy, painful silence of her sister's apartment, but a quiet that felt clean, free. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything she had lost and what she still had left, herself. The next morning, the sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and landed across her face. She sat up slowly, stretched, and whispered to herself, "No more pity. No more waiting for anyone to save me." She looked around the little room and smiled again, a small but real smile. "I'll start over," she said softly. And this time she meant it. Life in Mowbray was far from easy. The first few weeks tested Zanil in every possible way. The little room she rented was cold at night, and the bathroom she shared with 2 other tenants often ran out of hot water. She didn't complain, though. She told herself this was temporary, a stepping stone. Every morning, she woke up early, put on her neatest clothes, and went out looking for work. After days of searching, she finally found a cleaning job at an office building in the city. The pay was small, but it was something. She started waking up at 5 a.m., catching the first taxi, and spending hours wiping desks, emptying bins, and scrubbing floors. Her body ached most nights, but she kept going. A few weeks later, she picked up another part-time job at a small cafe nearby. She worked there in the afternoons, serving coffee, cleaning tables, and sometimes helping in the kitchen when it got busy. The manager liked her quiet, hard-working nature, and even though the shifts were long, Zanil didn't mind. Work kept her focused. It kept her from thinking too much about the past. Money was tight. Some days, she skipped lunch just to save enough for rent or transport. Instant noodles became her regular dinner, and she counted every coin before going to bed. But despite the struggle, There was a strange peace in her new routine. No one was judging her. No one was talking behind her back. She came home tired, but it was her own tiredness, earned honestly. Slowly, she started to feel lighter. There were no fake smiles, no tension hanging in the air like before. Just quiet independence and the satisfaction of knowing she was standing on her own 2 feet, even if they were sore and blistered. One afternoon, while she was wiping down a counter at the cafe, the bell above the door rang. She looked up and froze for a second. It was a familiar face. Cabello, her old friend from university, walked in wearing a neat shirt and carrying a laptop bag. "Zanil," he said, surprised. "Wow, it's been years. You're working here?" She laughed awkwardly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah, I am. Life happened, you know." Cabello smiled kindly. "I get that. But you had a degree in business management, right? You were one of the top students." Zanil shrugged, half embarrassed, half proud that he still remembered. "Yeah, that's me. Things just didn't go as planned." He paused for a moment, thinking. "Actually, the company I work for, a logistics firm, is looking for someone to help with operations. Nothing fancy, but your background would fit perfectly." Zanil's heart skipped. "Really?" "Really," Cabello said, grinning. "Come by tomorrow. I'll introduce you to my boss." When he left, Zanil stood there for a moment, stunned. It had been so long since something good had come her way. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the start of the change she'd been working toward all along. The next morning, Zanil woke up before sunrise, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She ironed her best shirt, the same one she had worn to her last job interview months ago, and brushed her hair neatly. She didn't have much to wear that looked professional, but she made sure everything was clean and tidy. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she whispered, "You've got this." She took a taxi to the address Cabello had sent her, a modern glass building in the city center with the name Translogix Logistics printed across the front. Her hands were slightly sweaty as she walked through the doors. The receptionist gave her a polite smile and asked her to wait. Moments later, Cabello appeared, his warm grin instantly calming her nerves. "Zanil, you made it," he said. "Come, I'll introduce you to my boss." He led her through a maze of offices until they reached a boardroom. Inside sat a man in his late 40s, neatly dressed, with an easy but focused expression. "Mr. Dlamini," Cabello began, "this is the person I told you about, Zanil, my university friend. She has a degree in business management." Mr. Dlamini nodded and gestured for her to sit. "So, Zanil," he said, glancing at her resume, "tell me a bit about yourself." Her heart raced, but she spoke clearly. She told him about her studies, her previous job in Durban, and how she had helped organize logistics and coordinate deliveries before the company downsized. She didn't mention the months of struggle or the cleaning job, just the lessons she'd learned from them. Mr. Dlamini listened closely, occasionally nodding, and when she finished, he smiled slightly. "You sound like someone who knows how to work hard," he said. "We're looking for a junior operations manager to help oversee shipments and handle reports. It's an entry-level position, but there's room to grow. Would you be interested?" Zanil almost couldn't believe her ear. "Yes, sir. I'd love to," she said quickly. "Good," he replied. "Let's start you on a trial week. If things go well, we'll make it official." That week felt like a blur. She arrived early every day, eager to prove herself. She double-checked schedules, handled calls, and even helped fix small problems that others had missed. Cabello guided her when she needed help, but most of the time, she figured things out on her own. It was exhausting, but for the first time in months, she felt useful. By Friday afternoon, Mr. Dlamini called her into his office. "You've done great work," he said, handing her a folder. "Welcome to the team." Zanil stepped out of the office with tears in her eyes. She had a real job again, a steady income, a second chance. Within 2 weeks, she managed to rent a small but comfortable flat closer to work. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. That evening, she sat on her new bed, the city lights twinkling through the window. She picked up her phone and sent a message to her parents. "I found a job. Don't worry about me," her mother replied within minutes. "We're so proud of you, my child." Zanil smiled, her eyes wet but her heart full. After everything she had been through, she had finally stood back up, and this time, she knew she wouldn't fall again. A few months had passed since Zanil started her new job, and life was finally beginning to feel steady. She woke up each morning with purpose, walked confidently into her office, and came home to her own place. Quiet, small, but full of peace. She was no longer the woman who had sat crying in her sister's spare room. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up. One evening, as she was cooking dinner, her phone rang. It was her mother. Her voice was soft, but carried that tone Zanil knew meant something was wrong. "Your sister is in trouble," her mother said quietly. "She lost her job, and her landlord wants her out. She doesn't know what to do." Zanil froze, the spoon in her hand hovering over the pot. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Life's circle had spun faster than she ever imagined. The same sister who had once wanted her gone was now in the exact position she had been in. After a long silence, she finally said, "I'll go see her tomorrow." When Zanil arrived at Nokuthala's apartment the next day, she noticed the difference right away. The curtains were half closed, the once tidy space now cluttered with boxes and clothes. Nokuthala opened the door slowly. Her eyes were tired, her hair tied back in a messy bun. For the first time, she didn't look like the confident, put-together sister Zanil had always known. "Hey," Zanil said softly. "Hey," Nokuthala replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She stepped aside to let her in. The air between them was heavy with everything that hadn't been said for months. Zanil looked around. The living room felt smaller than she remembered, though it was the same place where she had once sat, humiliated and silent. The memory flashed for a second, but it didn't sting the same way anymore. Nokuthala sat down and stared at her hand. "I didn't mean what I said back then," she whispered. "I was stressed, angry. I don't even know. I just said things. I'm so sorry." Zanil watched her sister struggle to speak. A part of her wanted to say, "Now you know how it feels." But she didn't. The bitterness that once lived in her chest wasn't there anymore. She had grown past it. "It's all right," Zanil said quietly. Nokuthala looked up, surprised. "We all have bad days," Zanil continued. "You said something hurtful, but I moved on. You don't owe me anything." But it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Her voice was calm, steady, filled with a kind of strength Nokuthala had never heard. Zanil wasn't that broken little sister anymore. She was standing tall, with grace and quiet power. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zanil stood, glanced around the room once more, and said, "I'll help you figure things out, okay?" Nokuthala nodded, tears filling her eyes. As Zanil walked toward the door, she realized something. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes, it's just the peace you feel when you know you've already healed. After that visit, Zanil decided to help her sister the same way she had once needed help. She didn't think twice about it. Nokuthala was struggling, and even though part of her remembered the pain of those harsh words, she knew that holding on to anger wouldn't heal anything. A week later, she spoke to her manager about an opening at her company, a short-term position in the administration department. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to help Nokuthala get back on her feet. When her boss agreed, Zanil called her sister immediately. "There's a temporary job where I work," she said. "It's just a contract, but it might help you for now." There was silence on the other end of the line. "You'd really do that for me?" Nokuthala asked softly. "Yes," Zanil said simply. "Everyone needs a second chance." When Nokuthala started, the office buzzed quietly with whispers. Some people had already heard bits of their story. They looked at Zanil with curious eyes, murmuring things like, "Can you believe that's her sister? The one who once called her a burden." But Zanil didn't care. She didn't correct them or defend herself. She just kept working, focused and calm. She wasn't there to prove anything or to get revenge. She had already won her peace the day she chose to forgive. At work, she carried herself with quiet confidence. She helped Nokuthala settle in, introduced her to the team, and gave her tips on how to handle the tasks. There was no trace of pride or resentment in her tone, just patience and kindness. Nokuthala, on the other hand, seemed humbled. She worked hard, often staying late, trying to show that she was serious about turning things around. Over time, the whispers around the office began to change. People started talking about Zanil's work ethic instead of her past. Her manager often asked for her opinion during meetings, and her team respected her for her calm way of leading. She had a quiet authority that didn't need shouting. It came from experience, from the kind of strength that grows only through struggle. One afternoon, as she walked past the break room, she overheard two coworkers talking. "Zanil's really something, hey? The way she runs things, it's impressive," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "She's not loud or bossy, but when she speaks, people listen. She's got that natural leadership thing." Zanil stopped for a second, just out of sight. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. For so long, she had doubted herself, wondered if she was enough, if she could ever rebuild her life. And now here she was, respected, independent, and finally at peace. She walked back to her desk, sat down, and smiled. Not a polite, careful smile like before, but a real one. For the first time in years, she didn't need anyone's approval to feel proud of herself. She had built her own strength, and this time, no one could take it away. Months later, Zanil's mother called to invite everyone for her birthday dinner. It was a big deal. Her mom loved family gathering, and this one felt extra special. But this time, things were different. Zanil was no longer the struggling sister, sitting quietly. She was the one organizing everything. She booked the restaurant, ordered the cake, and even paid the full bill without hesitation. When her parents tried to offer money, she smiled and said, "Please, let me do this. It's my gift." When the evening came, the whole family gathered at a cozy restaurant in the city. The air smelled of roasted meat and laughter. Zanil arrived early, helping her mom settle in and making sure everyone was comfortable. Her father couldn't stop bragging about how proud he was of her. Even Nokuthula sat beside her, smiling shyly, her eyes softer than Zanil remembered. Dinner began with laughter, old stories, and clinking glasses. The atmosphere was warm, and for once, Zanil felt completely at ease. No tension, no quiet judgments, just family. But as the waiter brought out the cake, and everyone started singing, "Happy Birthday," Zanil noticed Nokuthula looking nervous. Her sister's hands fidgeted with her napkin, her eyes darting around the table. Then, just as the laughter began to settle, Nokuthula stood up. Her voice was low but steady. "Before we eat," she said, "I need to say something." The room fell silent. Even their parents stopped smiling, sensing something important was coming. Nokuthula took a deep breath and looked straight at her sister. "I once said things I didn't mean," she began. "Back when you stayed with me, I was cruel. I said you were a burden. But the truth is I was jealous. You worked hard, and seeing you fall made me feel better about myself. I hated that your strength reminded me of what I hadn't done. I'm ashamed of that. I'm sorry, Zanil." Her voice cracked on the last word. Zanil sat frozen, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected this. For months, she had convinced herself she didn't need an apology, that she had already moved on. But hearing her sister say those words out loud, admitting her jealousy, her regret, hit deeper than she thought it would. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Let's just move forward." Nokuthula exhaled, tears slipping down her cheeks. Their mother reached out and held both their hands, her own eyes glistening. "My daughters," she said softly, "this is all I ever wanted, to see peace between you." The tension that had once divided the family seemed to melt away in that moment. The laughter slowly returned, the candles flickered, and the air felt lighter than it had in years. As Zanil looked around the table, at her mother smiling, her father joking, and her sister finally at peace, she realized something simple but powerful. Healing didn't come from pretending the past hadn't happened. It came from facing it, forgiving it, and letting it go. That night, as everyone laughed around the dinner table, Zanil sat back and just watched. Her mother was glowing with happiness, her father was telling his usual funny stories, and even Nokuthula was smiling freely again. The sound of their laughter filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, Zanil felt completely at peace. She thought about how far she had come, from crying alone in a dark room to sitting here surrounded by love and forgiveness. It was strange how life could turn things around. The same words that once broke her were now just a memory, one that no longer had power over her. As she looked at her sister, she finally understood something she never had before. Sometimes people call you a burden not because you are one, but because your strength reminds them of what they're missing in themselves. It took her pain to realize that. Her mother raised her glass with a proud smile. "To my daughters, both strong in their own ways." Everyone clinked their glasses together. Zanil smiled, her eyes soft but steady. That one moment of betrayal, the unmuted words that once shattered her, had actually built her. It had taught her to stand on her own, to find peace without needing anyone's approval. As the night went on and her family's laughter filled the air, she felt something deep inside her settle, a quiet kind of strength. She finally knew the truth. Silence may hurt, but rising quietly after betrayal speaks louder than any apology ever could.